So, I'm one of those Star Wars fans that didn't necessarily think that was a Star Wars fan. For most of my life, I always wondered what was quite amazing about Star Wars that threw everybody in a tizzy. And it wasn't until at some point in my life, some friends said, in order for us to continue our friendship, I had to watch the Star Wars movies. I'm just joking. They didn't give me that ultimatum in those words, but they kind of implied it. So, starting from the tedious episode 4, 5, and 6, which was basically a 70s production, and then down to episode 1, 2, and 3, I went ahead and I watched the Star Wars movies, and it never necessarily changed my mind. But there was something that was quite unique about the movies, and those were the stories of the Jedi. The entirety of the Jedi premise is based on a whole lot of old school tropes and very classic storytelling elements that you really cannot just ignore it. Whether you like Star Wars or not, the Jedi stories are actually quite unique. Why? Because they hold to a lot of the things that we as humans like to see in storytelling. Good guys versus bad guys on the core, codes of honor, codes of all kinds of stuff, are really just interesting for many people who enjoy good stories. And so that was basically it. I didn't necessarily pay attention to any of the Star Wars stuff, and even with the internet exploding and more Star Wars fans making their presence known on the internet, it still didn't really pull me in. Believe it or not, it would be years down the road before the animated series Clone Wars pulled me into the Star Wars story. Now, what was really unique about the Clone Wars run was it had multiple episodes and it was able to explore many other storylines in the Star Wars universe. And that really caught my attention because for the longest time, I wasn't really impressed with the Wookiees or impressed with the other tribes and the other storylines. But once the Clone Wars started to expose a lot more about other tribes, other ethnicities, other planets, other storylines, then Star Wars started to make sense. Behold, it then came down to the point where, as of today, we now have an entire series on a Star Wars story called The Mandalorian. And I think that was basically the whole thing that sealed the deal. There's no way I could call myself not a Star Wars fan and say, oh, I enjoy The Mandalorian and I enjoy these storylines of the Jedi. By default, I'm already a Star Wars fan. And even though I try to say I'm not, it's kind of a weird conundrum if I do that. So I am a Star Wars fan, apparently. And for the longest time, I also necessarily didn't take any interest in talking about Star Wars in my, coverage of video games until the studio that I've played their games for about 2.5 years or even more, which is basically their second game, decided that they were going to announce that they are making a Star Wars game. So Star Wars has somehow pushed itself into multiple facets of the things that I kind of, in a sense, enjoy or things that are part of my hobbies. Today's video, we're going to be talking about Ubisoft Massive's intent to make a Star Wars game. Welcome to the Gamey Daddy channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. We talk about gaming, we talk about all kinds of fun stuff around the industry, and so thank you very much for being here. So Ubisoft Massive has basically been tagged as a studio that's going to be working on a Star Wars game, since Lucasfilms and all of the parties involved have pretty much seen that EA's exclusive right to the Star Wars game development thing is kind of coming to its close or has already come to its close. Now, this doesn't mean that EA is not going to be making Star Wars game. It's just their exclusive hold of this has now finally reached the point where it has pretty much expired, and I don't think Lucasfilms has any incentive to want to extend that exclusivity, seeing that EA had a lot of opportunities and have done a botched up job to try to bring out interesting Star Wars games that would meet many different audiences. Remember at the beginning of this video, I gave that long intro just to let you guys know that within the Star Wars universe, there are so many elements that will at least catch everybody's attention to a specific extent. EA was sitting on these rights to make these video games, and all they were trying to do was catch only their own attention in fattening their bank accounts, and somehow they almost missed out on everything were it not for the EA studio Respawn that made a Jedi game for them that came out in 2019 that was, in my opinion, a decent entry into the mix. Now, this doesn't mean other Jedi games hadn't been made or whatever, but these other Jedi games and these other Star Wars games held to a lot of those elements that had players enjoying what Star Wars was about. But for some strange reason, it appeared EA did not necessarily care to entertain or at least provide a lot of their gamers with what was necessary, but they wanted to just make money. Hence hence a lot of mediocre games that came out along those lines. Now, I'm not saying Battlefront 2 was mediocre, but I am saying that it did have a lot of potential that was missed. I'm not saying that the first Battlefront was mediocre. I'm saying it was quite horrible, because the premise alone EA tried to use to bring that game did not necessarily in any way draw attention or pull attention of gamers. So already we can say that EA didn't do a good job. EA then further went ahead and pretty much canceled a single-player Star Wars game that they were working on, only to have another single-player Star Wars game in the background. They put out a statement, canceled one that Amy Hennig and a studio under them was working on, saying it appeared players didn't want those experiences, while somehow Respawn was making another one. So it felt like they were talking out of two sides of their mouth, showing them their own selves that they're quite hypocritical about their own positions. It's like an implosion that was going on. So when I saw that Ubisoft was taking on a Star Wars game, I was like, at least another studio who is not as bad as EA is going to have a shot at a Star Wars game. And today we're going to be looking at some of those elements. So right now the project is in its most infant stage, and I love to make these kinds of videos because it gives a lot of room for discussion. And a lot of people have said they're not necessarily interested in a Star Wars game from Ubisoft, but a lot of the people that I've spoken with or had these discussions with are people who've played the Tom Clancy Division games that Ubisoft Massive has made in, say, the past 6 years. And so most of their attention and direction is based on these games. And so most of them would just tell you we're not really interested in Star Wars. Now, here's the kicker. What if the Star Wars game is willing, or is a game that has a lot of the elements and mechanics that has made the Division and the Division 2 quite the success that it is? And when I say success, I might get somebody jeer. Well, hear this out. The Division 1 and Division 2 in total has had a total of about 40 million players. I can guarantee you that at least there is one player out of the 40 million players that enjoys the mechanics from the Division 2. And if that player is similar to another, maybe 25 to 30% of that multitude of a player base, then I can say that more than likely they would love to see those mechanics show themselves in a Star Wars game. And I think it'd be a smart choice for Ubisoft Massive to implement these systems depending on how they want to go or what direction they want to go with this Star Wars game. So let's look at some of the possibilities, and this video may even be divided into a part 1 and a part 2 just to be able to flesh out a lot of these things, because this is not something that I want to cover in one video by itself. So let's say that this Star Wars game is not a single player experience, not a story driven experience, but actually a multiplayer cooperative game, or perhaps a looter shooter. Oh my gosh. This is what I think a lot of the audience from the Division community might be willing to say, okay, we're going to probably cave a little bit and pay attention to this. Now, the multiplayer idea or the multiplayer stance was actually executed by EA's DICE. And the reason I'm actually bringing this to the forefront is because that studio is used to the multiplayer game setting. They're used to those multiple players jumping into sessions experience. They've made the Battlefield games for a while, and so this is what they're good at. I'm under the impression that it appears that Ubisoft Massive may take that approach as well to extend their game, or to extend the loop, and probably capitalize on the fact that Lucasfilm is more than likely open to that universe in order to create something that is replayable, to have players always hop into that ecosystem over time. So that's probably all that I'm leaning on. I'm not saying that the Star Wars game is going to be a multiplayer co-op game. No, I'm not saying that, but I think it's probably the closest place that you're going to see things lean into. And more than likely, I don't think it's going to be a space shooter type game as well, with the your spaceships fighting one another and all of that stuff. No, it's not going to be a TIE fighter combat game. I don't think that's what they're going to go for. Hopefully they don't, because the EA Star Wars Squadrons game seems to have also capitalized on that. And then when it comes to a single player game, it's in the whispers that Jedi Fallen Order, its sequel, is being made by Respawn Entertainment right now. In fact, if you want to get some glimpse of those comparisons, you can go on the Twitter pages of the developers who worked on those games, and they still continue to call themselves the Jedi team. That's basically what they do. They work on the Jedi development part of the game. So it seems like they're still working on it. But if Ubisoft Massive decides they're going to go the way that they went with The Division to bring Star Wars into that kind of gameplay experience, I think we're looking at some sort of a cataclysmic event about to take place in gaming. Not only are they going to be able to attract a lot of fans who like looter shooters, or not only are they going to be able to attract fans that are from the Division universe, you're looking at a Star Wars player base also possibly paying attention to something like this. Now, again, I can't speak for the Star Wars fans out there, so not many of them might be thrilled about a proposition like that. In fact, they may actually push back and say, no, this whole games as a service type thing might not necessarily be what we want. But here's the deal. If you look at the patterns and look at the way the Star Wars franchise is being handled, that seems like the business decision that its top brass is going to be willing to allow to roll. And Ubisoft Massive, having had the experience of bringing 2 games out on that front, seems even more likely that that's the direction that they're going to want to go. Now, if you also kind of put things in perspective, you have to look at the creative director who has been assigned this project, or who Massive is entrusting this project into their hands, and that's Julian Garrity. So many people within the Division community will, say different things about how they perceive Julian Garrity's style of creativity, but there's something that has to still be considered. The very first thing is he was the associate creative director on the first game. So having a lot of that knowledge and experience, knowing exactly where to fail and where to succeed, he then got granted the responsibility to do the second game. Taking a lot of those things, he put his work into the second game, also knowing where to succeed and knowing exactly where to fail. Now, along the lines, you're going to find people between both games who will tell you that they don't enjoy nor do they like some of the aspects of both games. In fact, you're going to find a lot more saying that they don't like the second game in the way that its creative direction went. But at this point, Star Wars, I think, is going to provide a brand new outlook. A lot of things are going to be different. It's not going to, scale the way the first and second Division games actually did scale. But along the lines, if somewhere we get more information that this game is going to have those elements, or the game is going to be structured like that, I believe that this is going to change the perception that a lot of people right now have about this Star Wars project. The only reason I've made this video as to this particular point is because it's quite curious that a studio like Massive will not develop a very important IP along the lines of its strength. I think this is probably the best leanings for them right now, and especially the fact that Disney, Lucasfilms, all these people who own this particular intellectual property would like to see something like that continue to go on and not get the plug just pulled out of from under it. I mean, Battlefront 2 right now with EA, they've already, they're no longer going to be giving any support to it. Look at the way Ubisoft manages a lot of their games. Even if they don't want to give any support to their games, they still allow for the games to continue to run and just, continue to do its own thing. But again, down the road, if they want to continue it with sequels and all of the above, I think it's something that would actually fill in the space to get the job done for players and gamers who enjoy games like these. Video is already too long. Talk to you in part 2. Let me hear your thoughts so far. Looter shooter Star Wars game from Ubisoft Massive. Let's fight in the comment section. Peace out.